Welcome to the Project Chana Power Hour podcast. This is a project of mikvah.org and Neshei Chabad. We encourage you to set aside 1 hour each week to learn about the 3 mitzvahs of women. In this hour, we delve into 20 minutes on Shabbos, 20 minutes on the topic of kashrus, and 20 minutes on Taras HaMishpacha. Together, let's elevate our homes and prepare ourselves to greet Mashiach. And here's an opportunity for you to actively participate and support this initiative. Consider sponsoring a week of learning. Reach out to us at projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com to sponsor an episode. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy today's recording.
Welcome back to Project Chana Power Hour. Each week we get together to learn and strengthen ourselves in our special mitzvahs of Kashrus, Shabbos, and Taras HaMishpacha, as well as other halachas that are pertinent to women. Our goal is to prepare ourselves and our homes to welcome Mashiach. Tonight's learning is dedicated Le'ilui Nishmas Harav Yitzchak ben Harav Eliezer Tzvi Zev Alav Shalom. May his neshama have an aliyah. If you would like to dedicate a class in honor or zuchos of someone, please reach out via our email to projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com. Please join us afterwards for tzedakah tehillim and a Mashiach thought. Okay, now for our first class on Shabbos, we are excited to begin a new series on the halachas of carrying with Rabbi Broin. We will learn the relevant halachas that come up and gain clarity on this important topic. Rabbi Broin is the Mara D'Asra of Crown Heights. Thank you so much for making time to be on our program.
My absolute pleasure. Yes, it is indeed an exciting topic. We're going to be talking all about carrying on Shabbos. There's a lot of practical stuff, but we need to go through the Yesodis first to understand the basic foundations of the malacha of Hitzah, of carrying. So in the Torah it says about working on Shabbos, the Torah uses the terms Naseres Hadibris Lo Isase Kol Malacha. You're not allowed to do any type of work. The Torah doesn't tell us which type of actions are called malacha and which type of actions are not called malacha. Just says the word malacha. Like the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, Negeres HaKodesh, Loi Pirish Mahi Malachi, doesn't tell us what's malacha. Torah Sheba'al Peh tells us there's 39 known forms of malachas. Moving stones and beams, it's muksa, but it's not one of the malachas of the Torah. The same with all mitzvahs for that matter. All mitzvahs say, mitzvahs leisa say, if we don't have a Torah Sheba'al Peh, we don't know what they are. So if you would use logic, carrying from one domain to another domain would not be considered a malacha. And in fact, in halacha, we refer to carrying as malacha gerua, a cheap, weak form of malacha. The reason it's called malacha gerua, a number of reasons. First of all, because there's really not much of a difference logically between carrying from a private property to a public property or carrying from a private property to another private property. Same thing. But the Torah says that when you're carrying from private to public or vice versa, then that's considered a malacha. Whereas when you're carrying from one private property to another private property, there's rabbinic prohibitions. We're not going to talk about that right now. It's not called malacha. Also, you could carry in your own house, in a Reshus HaYachid, in a private domain, you could carry something very, very heavy. But if a person carries into a Reshus HaRabim, into a public area, person carries kigroidris, even the size of a dried fig, he is chayiv skila, karis. If he does it accidentally, he's karban chatas, he's mamash chayiv min haTorah. So logic tells us this wouldn't be a malacha. Wow, what's the logic in this? Another reason why carrying is a malacha gerua, because nothing really happened. What did you do? You just moved something from one place to another place. You had an object before, you still have an object, it just changed locations. So the fact that you're changing locations, why would that be a malacha? Yeah, I mean, you could ask this question when you capture an animal, why would that be a malacha? I mean, but the difference is over there, the animal was free, and now it's in a man's property. Also, you're making this animal suitable, that the object changed, you did some type of tikkun that you're doing to the object, now it's suitable for a person to shecht and use. But when you carried, you moved it from here to there, nothing really changed. You can, the question of, one of the questions that people ask when there's one of the malachas ma'amir, collecting, gathering fruit. Why is that called making a change? Why is that a more of a severe malacha? So one of the Rishonim answer, because when you gather, you bringing it together, you're tying it together, you're holding it in such a way it shouldn't be spread out, you're making sure people won't step in it or won't get destroyed. So you're doing something, which is, you're accomplishing something. Besides for the fact that gathering is one of the 11 steps of making bread. It's a preparation to making bread. You plant, you plow, you cut, you winnow, you gather. So it's part of a process. Carrying is just stam. You move something from one place to another. Well, these are all reasons why it would be considered a malacha gerua, not a cheap form of malacha. Nonetheless, The Torah, because it includes, when the Torah talks about that we now do Malach on Shabbos, it puts it in proximity, it juxtaposes it, puts it right near the idea of Meleches HaMishkan, that there's work being done for the Mishkan. And from here we derive the idea that you're not allowed to work for the Mishkan on Shabbos, because the Torah puts Shabbos and Mishkan together. So from here we understand anything that was important in the process of making the Mishkan is called a Malacha. Carrying was an important process in making the Mishkan, because the Torah tells us, in Parshat Yaakov, Moshe Rabbeinu instructed the Jewish people, Ish v'isha al yasu oid melacha l'srumas hakodesh. No one should do any more work. And what was the work? The work was bringing stuff, donating stuff to the Mishkan. And once the instruction was given, there's so much has been collected, we don't need any more donations. Halavai, our Moses today should announce we don't need any more donations. But Moshe Rabbeinu made that announcement. He gave an instruction to the whole entire Machne Yisrael, no more malacha should be done. Vayikoli ha'ami havi, and people stopped bringing. What was the bringing? They were bringing stuff from their homes, which was a private domain, and they brought it to Moshe, which was in the Levi camp, which was considered a public domain, the Machne Leviah. That bringing donations, the Torah refers to as malacha. So this teaches us that carrying is a form of malacha, even though logic would say it's not a malacha. In Gemara, Mishnayos and Gemara, we have a Masechta called Masechta Shabbos, followed by Masechta Eruvin. The very first thing Masechta Shabbos starts off with the idea of carrying. All the Mefarshim ask, we start off with carrying. Only in the 7th chapter of Shabbos do we have a list of all the 39 malachas, Perek Klal Gadol, in the 7th chapter, and a list. There's 40 minus 1, Arbaim Chasarachas, 39. The list carrying is the very last, but you somehow started, it's the last of all the 39 malachas, you somehow started the Masechta with carrying. So a number of answers are given, and I'm mentioning all of this because it's part of the context of understanding the malacha of carrying, that the malacha of carrying is a malacha which is constant, and people stumble with this malacha. The Rambam writes, most people, a majority, on a regular basis, could stumble with the malacha of carrying. And therefore, people don't see this as a malacha. Therefore, the Gemara starts off with the malacha of carrying. Bichlal is something that's common, we start off first. But here, not only because it's common, also because it's something that people stumble with. The other thing that is brought is because it seems like it's not a malacha, we want to emphasize carrying right in the beginning. Another explanation, the Maral Meprak says that not carrying makes you really fully rest on Shabbos. Yom Tov, you're allowed to carry with limitations, but you're allowed to carry. The Mishnah starts off Masechta Shabbos with the thing that makes you have the full primary rest on Shabbos. That's the reason why it's listed as the last in the 39 malachas. The one that you finished, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do it. And you also don't carry, which is much more than Yom Tov, therefore you're fully resting. And that's why it's the very first in starting Masechta Shabbos with the idea of carrying. Chassidus explains that the malacha of carrying is the most fundamental aspect of all other malachas. The primary aspect of every malacha is about carrying. And Chassidus brings a medrash that there was an apokoydes that once asked Rebbe Kiva, if the Eibishter keeps Shabbos and he respects Shabbos, why is the Eibishter blowing wind? Why is it letting rain come down? Why is he letting things grow? I thought he keeps Shabbos. So Rebbe Kiva told this apokoydes, and he gave him a mashal from carrying. He said, you need a native in one property, in a private property. Do you need you're allowed to carry there? He said, yeah. So he said, well, the whole world is Hashem's private property, so he could do whatever he wants. Well, the obvious question of that answers how Hashem is allowed to carry on Shabbos. But Hashem does many other malachas. Making things grow has nothing with carrying. It's like the guy said, there's an Erev, therefore I'm allowed to drive my car on Shabbos. Because it's an Erev. Famous joke. Or he said that he puts on a seatbelt, so it's considered like his garment. It's like a Shabbos belt. So what's Rebbe Kiva's answer? That because the whole world belongs to Hashem, it's his own private domain, therefore he's allowed to do all these malachas. So Chassidus explains the yesodish of all malachas have to do with carrying. Shabbos is about a day which is totally for Hashem. Shabbos LaHashem. The idea of Shabbos is to recognize the fact that Eibishter made a world. He created a world over 6 days, and the 7th day he rested. And Eibishter constantly recreates the world from nothing to something throughout the 6 days of the week. On Shabbos, Hashem rests, even though according to Chassidus, he doesn't create the world through utterance, through dibur, but rather through thought. But either way, so now the idea that Hashem is constantly creating the world, and Hashem is the owner of the whole world, and the whole world is in Hashem's possession, that's what Shabbos is all about. When we keep Shabbos, we establish the faith in Hashem, that the whole world belongs to Hashem, the Rishus HaYachid, the Eibishter is HaYachid, Yichidish HaLoilam, and the whole world is the Rishus HaYachid. The Eibishter created a world, it's a concealment. The world's Olam is from the word Helam. You could think that nobody's running the world, Chas v'Shalom. There's good in the world, there's bad in the world, there's two domains, there's a domain of good and a domain of negative. But Shabbos tells you, no, it all belongs to Hashem. So when a person does malacha on Shabbos, he weakens the emunah that everything belongs to Hashem, and he reinforces the mistake, a form of carrying out of the private domain. He's taking out of the domain of Hashem and making the world belong to the Rishus HaRabim, to the multitude, to the manys. So the nekuda of all malachas is carrying. So the Bekiva was telling us, if the whole world is Hashem's, there's no problem in any form of malacha. All malachas are all about the idea not to carry out of private to public domain. And that's a nice Chassidish introduction. I will mention as well that if you look at Masechta Shabbos, there's so many chapters of Masechta Shabbos talk about carrying. For example, about cooking, we only have 2 chapters. And in addition to that, we have a whole Masechtas Erev, and almost all of the Masechtas all about carrying and Rishus HaRabim and Rishus HaYachid. So there's a lot dedicated to the theme of carrying. Chazal made a lot of decrees, Gzeiras Midrabanan, because of the malacha of carrying, perhaps because it was weak in people's eyes. So Chazal made a rule that even in private domains, if they share a shared property, you have to make an Erev Chatzeres. Chazal added a whole new domain called the Karmas, which we'll learn about. Chazal made a rule that you're not supposed to blow shofar on Shabbos. It's a mitzvah in the Torah to blow shofar, and they've just rejected that mitzvah because people might end up carrying the shofar. No shaking lulav on Shabbos. Muktzah came about, according to one opinion, because people might end up carrying. So many things is to protect the institution of not carrying on Shabbos because it's that important. Tashlech on Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos. It always was the custom to do Tashlech on Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos. The Rebbe once explained at length that al pi halacha and al pi kabbalah, there's no reason in the world why Rosh Hashanah that falls on Shabbos, you shouldn't do Tashlech that day and push it off to the next day. The Rebbe proved that halachically, kabbalistically. The Rebbe mentioned that in a certain Mekubalim, in their Menhagim, it's very clear that they do Tashlech on Shabbos. Why is it that we don't do Tashlech on Shabbos? So because we're afraid people will carry, we can't make decrees on our own. Chazal were able to make their own decrees. We don't have the ability to make a decree. So the Nekuda the Rebbe spoke in this Vav Tishrei Febreign is that over time we saw it's not about making decrees. This is facts. We see people are carrying because they go to Tashlech, they take out a Machzor, take out a Siddur. So it was pushed off, even though really it's supposed to be on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. Again, it shows you how it's important to do things to protect against carrying. So in carrying, we have the Av Malacha of carrying, which is the father, the root, and we have a Tulda. We have the offspring, the offshoot. Anything which is similar to the Malacha in the Mishkan is called a Tulda, a result, an offspring, an offshoot, a birth. It's equally forbidden. So when it comes to the malacha of carrying, the Torah said, malacha, you can't do any work, which includes the idea of carrying. When it comes to malacha of carrying, there's 2 parts. There's taking out hoitzah, taking out from a private domain to a public domain. And that's the av malacha. That's what they did in the Mishkan, where they took from their private houses and they brought into the Machne Leviah, into where Moshe Rabbeinu was in the Levite camp. That was carrying from a private domain to a public. It's called taking out, but also hachnasa, bringing back in, taking from the public area to the private area. That's similar to that. That we call a tulda. That's very, very similar. Some people say they're both considered av malachas. I will mention as well that in Yirmiyah, in Tanakh, we find that they were warned. The Navi came and told them, "Be careful! Don't carry anything on Shabbos out of your houses." And some people say from there we have very clear psukim that talk about the idea of carrying. Interestingly, the pasuk mentions 3 times the Navi warns them they should not desecrate Shabbos, and he keeps on saying, don't carry, don't take in, don't take out. He tells them not to do any work, but he specifically emphasizes carrying 3 times, which again shows you the significance. So there's carrying out and carrying in, the both of malachas. Throwing something from a private domain to a public domain or vice versa is also part of the tulda, is an offspring of the malacha of Heitzah. Taking someone, Moshe Rabbeinu gave us over from Har Sinai, Halach al Moshe Sinai, that as part of the malach of Hitza'ah or Hachnasa, taking out and taking in, is also when the person is within a public domain and he takes something in the public domain for 4 amas, a stretch of 4 amas, which is about 6 feet, if you carry something in the public domain from one area to another in the street, or you throw something, that's also a tulda, an offspring of Hitzah. Likewise, if a person is in a private area, he's on his porch, and he passes something to someone else's porch, in between my private property and the other person's private property, there's a Reshus Ram, there's a public thoroughfare. He's also chayiv on Shabbos, because that's what happened in the Mishkan, where everything goes back to the Mishkan. The Leviim were in the public domain in the desert. That was considered a public domain in the Levi area. And they would have wagons. One wagon, and then another wagon in front of it. In between the wagon and the other wagon, there was a Reshus Ram, a public area, and they would pass the beams for the Mishkan, the Krashim, were passed. And therefore, this is considered a tulda, a result, an offshoot of Hitzah, the Malach of carrying. Even we have Moitzi, Machnis, Mavir, Zoyrek, Moishit. I mentioned all of them, just mentioning the Hebrew terms. It's all based on what was in the Mishkan, and whatever was in the Mishkan in a primary way is considered an Av Malach, and then there's offshoots which are called tulda. The way the shiur that we will be giving on the Malach of carrying will be as follows. There's a lot of halachas. We're going to try to focus mainly on the halachas that are shavel chol nefesh, that are equivalent and relevant for everyone. There's general principles that we need to know first. There's complicated halachas that are not necessarily relevant for the public, but the practical halachas that are relevant to us, we'll try to focus on that. Now, people could often have questions about a personal situation that they want to know, so you can always email to Power Hour Project Chana. I don't know the email address offhand, sorry for that. You can email what particular shiloh that you had, and if we think it's relevant for the public, we'll either talk about it in the next upcoming shir, or in the shir, which we're going to be focusing on that theme, and it's relevant there. So if you have questions, of course, you can share them. So I want to go through the order. What we're going to do is as follows. We're going to talk about the 4 different domains on Shabbos. We're going to talk about the halachas of carrying. We're going to talk about Erev Chatzeris, so we just got someone put the email address on the Zoom over here, projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com. That's if you can send in questions, comments, feedback, criticisms, praise, whatever you want, could go there. And yeah, so we're going to talk about the 4 domains. We're going to talk about Hitzah and Reshus l'Reshus. We're going to talk about Erev Chatzeris, when you have 2 private courtyards which share a property, they can make some sort of Erev. In a city is much more complex topic. There's a lot of details that's negay for Rabbanim in a city to decide whether and how you make an Erev in the city and mechitzas around the city. There's a bunch of parts of that. What is considered carrying, what you wear, what you're allowed to wear on Shabbos, things would be considered that you're carrying because you're wearing something which you shouldn't be wearing on Shabbos. And then there's another whole area which is carrying on Yom Tov, even though you're allowed to carry Yom Tov, but it has details attached to it. So I'm just going to touch on the surface of the 4 domains right now. So in Hilchas Shabbos, we have 4 types of domains, and the reason I'm mentioning this is not to confuse people, just to get the basic principles, because it's hard to talk about Hilchas Shabbos without going through the 4 domains. There's an area called Reshus HaYachid, private domain, Reshus HaRabim, public domain, Karmelis, an in-between area, and a Makom Ptur, an area which is totally exempt. These are the 4 properties: private, public, in-between, exempt. Reshus HaYachid does not mean it belongs to one person. Reshus HaYachid means a place which is not a breached area. It's an area which is surrounded with fences, and it's made for people to live there. In order for something to be a Reshus HaYachid, it has to be a place which has walls, fences around it, fences which either reach all the way to the ground or within 3 tfachim of the ground. And we're going to use a lot of tfachim over here. 3 tfachim, just to give you a number, is about 9.5 inches. According to the Chaim Noah's way of measuring it. So if it has fences, the fences have to be tall 10 tfachim, which is about 31. I'm going to give it. I'm going to try not to be precise because it confuses things. Over 30 inches, 31 inches. So if it's high 10 tfachim, about the size of a small table, and it's a mechitza, even if it doesn't touch the ground, it's within 3 tfachim of the ground. Anything which is less than 3 tfachim is not really considered a breach. That's an area which has such walls that makes it into a Reshus HaYachid. By the way, that could be a area with walls. It could be a ditch, which is deep 10 tfachim, so that's considered has walls around it. It could be a pole, which is high 10 tfachim. So we have a halacha good asik, and we have a pole. The sides of the pole, we make them into invisible walls above it. Whatever, I don't want to go into all these complicated halachas. In order to be a Reshus HaYachid, it also has to have a area space of 4 by 4 tfachim. 4 by 4 tfachim is about 12 point something inches. by 12 point something inches. It needs to be an area that's chashuv, is usable. So it has to be big enough, wide, long and wide enough for tvachim, very small area, even less than the minimum kashrus of a sukkah. It has to have walls around it, high walls up to about 10 tvachim, the size of a small table, and that will make it into a reshus hayachid. There also is sometimes you have a mound, and the mound is not straight, and it goes upwards. It's slanty, so then we have to know if that's considered that does it have 10 tefachim, because it's 10 tefachim, but it's on a slant, and that would depend how steep is the slant. There's a whole set of halachas about that too. So that's the definition of a reshus hayachid. Now, if you have an area which has 3 walls around it, sometimes people have in their backyard, they have 3 walls, but the 4th wall is totally open. So min haTorah, that would be considered a reshus hayachid, and it's really irrelevant where it's open to. It could be open to a public area. It could be open to a karmelis, which is in between here, which is not mamish public. Min haTorah is also shing as a karmelis. So min haTorah, 3 walls does the job. Chazal do not allow to carry in a place which has just 3 walls around it. So you have sometimes in these alleyways and things like that, it just has 3 walls. There's nothing on the 4th wall. Chazal said it looks similar to reshus harabim, somewhat similar to a public area, because it's open. The whole 4th wall is open. And therefore they said in the place where it's open by the 4th wall, you need to do what they call a tikkun, some type of rectification. You need to do something there. What type of rectification? What to put there? To put there a door frame, to put there a lechi, a koira, a stick going upwards. That there's a bunch of details. It's how to exactly fix the 4th wall. Is a whole section of Shulchan Aruch dedicated to that. We're not going to talk about that. So that's defining a reshus hayachid. My time is up, but hopefully we'll be able to, by the time it comes to next year, the whole world will become one big reshus hayachid to the Eibishter.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Brian. For our next class, we are excited to continue on our next topic in Taras HaMishpacha, the halachas of keeping a calendar with Mrs. Chaya Klein. Mrs. Klein is administrator of mymikvahcalendar.org and a long-time certified color teacher. Thank you so much for being part of our program tonight.
Good evening, and thank you again for joining us tonight as part of the Project Chana Power Hour. Tonight, we will learn about the Onas Haveses, also known as the mikvah calendar. It is very important for us to know and understand that the laws of the calendar are not minhag, they are not chumrah, but they are actual halacha in Shulchan Aruch, and as much important part of Taras Mishpacha as every other part of Taras Mishpacha, becoming nida, harchakas, chafifa, tvila, and so forth. Chumash Vayikra, Perek Tes Vav, Pasuk Lamed Aleph says, "V'hizartem es b'nei Yisrael mitum asam," and you shall separate Bnei Yisrael from their tumah. Our Chachamim interpreted this to mean that a couple should separate intimately close to the time that the period is expected to begin. And it is for this reason as well that the Chachamim have obligated a woman to perform a bedika during these times as well. To that end, these mitzvahs, these halachas were instituted and must be kept. The keeping of the calendar is called the Onas Haveses, the times of the cycle. Why do we keep these laws? Why do we keep a calendar? To calculate and anticipate the start of menstruation, to avoid being intimate at a time when it was not halachically permitted. As we have learned in previous sessions, there are many ways that a woman can become nida: stains, medical procedures, childbirth, etc. And while all of these can cause nida status, they are not situations that are expected to occur on a regular expected basis. And therefore, even though a woman will become nida from all these different methods of becoming nida, she is not required to anticipate them occurring regularly, and so they do not affect the calendar calculations. Now, the separations that we are required to keep on these times of separation, known as the Onas Prisha, the times of separation, are not the same as all of the harchakas that you've just learned about that we are required to keep when we are nida. Marital relations are not permitted. It is, however, accepted practice by the poskim and praiseworthy, meaning that it draws down bracha for a couple, for the couple to refrain from sleeping in the same bed, kissing, hugging, and embracing even when fully clothed. And it's also really simply common sense to avoid doing those things that could very easily lead to what we're not permitted to do, which is marital relations. On every ona of anticipation, a bedika is required to be performed to prove that the bleeding has not started. Now, remember, we've learned there are two reasons that we are halachically required to perform bedikas. One is to prove that all bleeding has stopped, and these are the bedikas that we're required to do for the hefsek tahara and the 7 blood-free days, Sheva Nakim, to get to the mikvah. The other reason that we're required to perform bedikas is to prove that bleeding has not yet begun. And these are the bedikas that are associated with the mikvah calendar, times of separation. Before we begin, it's important for us to know that halacha mandates that only the Hebrew luach is used for these calculations. Let me just give you a screenshot. Give me a minute to share my screen. Okay, here I am. This is the mikvah calendar, the mikvah.org women's calendar. Okay, here's the screen. Yay. Okay, as you can see, this is a page from our mikvah calendar, and it shows you 1 page equals 1 month. All right. Now the secular dates, as you can see here, are you able to see me when I put my arrow around here?
Yes.
So, okay, so those are the secular dates, and they are included in the calendar simply because we live in Golos, and unfortunately we're more aware sometimes of the secular dates rather than the Hebrew dates. However, all of the calculations are made only using the Hebrew luach, the Hebrew dates. Now, it's also important for us to remember that every Hebrew date begins at Shkia and ends the next day at Shkia. So Sunday really begins Motzi Shabbos at Shkia, and it ends on Monday at Shkia. Monday Shkia, that's already the beginning of Tuesday, which ends Tuesday afternoon at Shkia, sunset, and so forth. Each day begins at sunset and ends the next day at sunset. And of course, we can remember this because Shabbos starts on Friday at sunset, even though we like the lift earlier, but it starts at sunset and it ends on Motzi Shabbos. Okay, now it's also important for us to remember that every Hebrew day and date is divided into 2 time frames. We have the night ona that begins at sunset and ends at sunrise, and the day ona that begins at sunrise and ends at sunset. All right, now if you look here at the date, here's the date Aleph. Notice the title on the top says Wednesday, but it has a shaded side and a white side. The darker shaded side, if you look at the little tab on top, says Tuesday night. So Wednesday consists of the night ona of Tuesday night, that's from sunset Tuesday afternoon to sunrise Wednesday morning. And the day ona of Wednesday consists of Wednesday from sunrise on Wednesday to sunset Wednesday afternoon. And so it is with each day. Thursday consists of Wednesday night and Thursday day. And so it is with every day of the calendar. Now, in order to keep our calendar accurately, we need to be aware of the exact time of sunrise, the exact time of sunset. Now, for Taras Mishpacha, there are many other zmanim we have to be aware of, but these two relate to the calendar. And it is imperative for a woman to know exactly when her period begins, the date and the time that it begins, so that she can, first of all, be sure which date it is, because our date changes at sunset, and also so that she can know what day, which ona it was, whether it was the night ona or the day ona, because this makes a very big difference into how the calendar is kept. And as I mentioned in an earlier class that I gave, I believe it's a very good suggestion for everyone to shoot their husband a text, as long as it's not Shabbos or Yom Tov, that their period has begun, or even that they have submitted a shaila to the Rav and are waiting to hear back from the Rav. This way, no matter how hectic life becomes, it is on your phone's date, time stamped. You can't go wrong. And that's even if your husband's sitting right next to you, because we're all convinced we're going to remember everything. I can speak from experience. We don't. Okay. So it's important for us to know the exact time of sunset every day and the exact time of sunrise every day. There is actually a wonderful app put out by Chabad.org called Hayom, and it's available for free. Create a username and enable your location services for the app, and it will detect where you are and give you the correct zmanim for your location at that time. If you click on the main menu notifications, you can opt for the app to send you a banner notification across the top of your phone for all of the zmanim, and you can use it, let's say 20 minutes or half an hour before, and then use your smartphone's assistant. I can't say her name because she'll start talking to me on your phone, so that you can be reminded, remind me in 5 minutes, remind me in 10 minutes, and so forth, because technology can be used for mitzvahs wonderfully, wonderfully well. All right. Now, if your period actually begins exactly at sunset or exactly at sunrise, then or even a few minutes in either direction, it's a good idea to call the Rav and ask the Rav which one you should mark as the start of your period, either the Ona before or the Ona after, because different times of the year in different locations, it can actually make a difference. And the Rav may tell you, well, if it began 2 minutes to Shkia, 2 minutes after Shkia on Monday, instead of marking it as the night Ona of Tuesday, mark it still as the day Ona of Monday. Okay, and this is important not only for the knowing when your period begins for the calendar calculations, but also for knowing when to start your count of the 5-day minimum. Because remember, it does not have to be a full 24-hour day to count as day one. All right. So this way we know that a period that's beginning after Shkia on Monday is considered as beginning on Tuesday. The night Ona, Monday night is the night Ona of Tuesday. All right. Now, some women have spotting or staining that precedes their period. And if this is the case, while the staining may be enough to create nida status, depending on the criteria, as we've learned before, it may not necessarily count as the start of the period for calendar calculations. So if it's enough to create nida status, the 5-day minimum would begin from there. But if the actual flow of the period only began a day or so later, that would actually be marked as the start of the period for calendar calculations. Whenever in doubt, please verify with your Rav. Again, we also have to be aware that the start of the period is marked from when you visually see that it began. So if you wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning, you've gone to the bathroom and you see that your period has started, you don't have to sit and wonder, oh, maybe it started at 5:30, maybe at 6:45 when I rolled over. You don't have to wonder. You went to the bathroom, you saw that it started at 7 a.m. That's what you mark down as the start of your period. We also need to know that if a woman does a badika, again, we only do badikas when we're halachically required to do so, unless the Rav specifically tells us to do one. And that badika comes out red blood or black, that is generally counted as the start of the period, even if the flow kicks in later, but this is always worth asking the Rav to be sure. Whenever we submit a shaila, a questionable color on a badika, garment, linens, anything, and the Rav gives back a psak of nida, it is vital to ask the Rav, how does this get marked on my calendar? Why? Because if the Rav tells you that it counts as a stain, stains, even though they may cause nida status and require the 5-day minimum hefsek tara, sheva nikim, and mikvah, do not create onos of separation for the calendar because they're considered something unexpected. We don't expect it to happen all the time. Whereas the period is something that is generally expected for a woman to have on a regular basis. So whenever you submit a shaila that the Rav gives a psak of nida, please be sure to ask, how do I mark it on my calendar? As a stain, which does not create onos of separation, or as a period, a re'iyah, a flow, which does. It is also very important to do the hefsek tahara on schedule. As soon as you're halachically able to, and you know which is day 5 or later of your cycle, and you see that you've stopped bleeding, do the hefsek tahara. Even if you're supposed to do your hefsek tahara on Monday, but you know next Monday for sure I'm not able to go to the mikveh because my husband's going to be out of town on a business meeting. Do your hefsek tahara on schedule, because the hefsek tahara is required for the calendar calculation. So we need the date and time the period begins and the date of the Hefsek Tahara. And again, shoot your husband a text when you do that Hefsek Tahara, so it's written down there. No matter how crazy life gets, you can refer to it. And that is what is needed. So the calculations are made based on when the Hefsek Tahara is actually completed before Shkia, and not when it could have, would have, or should have been done. In other words, you should have done it, but you got stuck in traffic, or you were too late, or you simply forgot. No, it goes according to when it's done. So we need accurate calculations. Please do the Hefsek Tahara on time, even if you're convinced that you won't be able to get to the mikveh on time next week. And circumstances might change. It's good to be prepared. Okay. Remember also that the Hefsek Tahara must be completed before Shkia to be valid, and that the day the Hefsek Tahara is completed is day 0 in reference to the 7 Nikim, the 7 blood-free days. Day 1 of the Sheva Nikim is the following day. So if a Hefsek Tahara is successfully completed on a Monday before Shkia, Monday's day 0. Day 1 of the Sheva Nikim is on Tuesday. Now, if a woman does wind up having to delay her tefillah, and remember, we only delay tefillah for a very valid reason, and a rav should always be consulted if mikveh needs to be delayed. The actual tefillah does not affect the calendar calculations. All right, so if it's delayed, the calendar calculations stay the same. Nothing changes. Halacha recognizes 2 types of cycles: a vesis kavua, a fixed cycle, and a vesis she'ena kavua, a cycle that is not fixed. A vesis kavua is established by 3 cycles beginning in a specific pattern. Some patterns need to be consecutive. Some patterns do not need to be consecutive. And cycles can create a kavua lakula for leniency or a kavua lachula for stringency, depending on the type of pattern. If a woman discovers any pattern to the start of her periods, she should consult the rav to determine if this is considered halachically a kavua and how to keep her calendar while this kavua is active. Some examples of kavua would be, it can be determined by a period, by 3 periods rather, that begin on the same Hebrew date and the same ona, night ona or day ona. So for example, if someone's period begins on the day ona of the 5th of Elul, the day ona of the 5th of Tishrei, and the day ona of the 5th of Cheshvan, this can create a kavua of the day ona of the 5th of the Chodesh. Another type of pattern could be what's called a vesis hadilug. An example, let's say the period begins on the 5th day ona of the 5th of Elul, the day ona of the 7th of Tishrei, and the day ona of the 9th of Cheshvan. What's happening here? The period is beginning on the day ona, but it's going up by 2 Chodesh dates each cycle. And this can be in any increments, 1 Chodesh date, 2, 5, 10, and it can be in either direction. They can be going ascending or descending pattern. Okay, and this type of a kavua, 3 cycles will create it lechumra. A 4th cycle is needed to create it lakula. Another example would be what's called a veses hasirug. A woman gets her period every 4th Tuesday on the day ona, or every 5th Wednesday on the day ona. Okay, so this also 3 cycles will make it lechumra, 4 will make it lakula. There is another way a kavua can be established. I will go into greater detail with that when we discuss the veses haflog on the interval cycle. I will not go into great detail on kavua in this course, simply because the laws of kavua are complex and variable, because it's very, very common for women to establish a pattern, but very seldom does a woman maintain the pattern. And the soon as her period stops starting in the pattern, the rav needs to be brought in to guide her on how to keep her calendar while that kavua remains active until it's uprooted. Okay, so I'm not going to go into great detail about kavua. I'm giving you just a taste of it so you know what to be on the lookout for. It's also important to note that for 24 months after birth or Rahman al-Islam loss of a pregnancy of over 40 days duration counting from a mikvah, a woman is considered nesulekas damim, and she can, even though she has to keep the laws of the calendar if her periods resume, she cannot establish a kavua until 24 months have finished. All cycles going to establish a kavua must be from month 25 after birth or such a miscarriage or forward. If someone does have an active kavua at the time that they conceive, they should consult their Rav as soon as they discover they are pregnant, and they may need to be aware of this kavua in month 25 after birth. If their periods have resumed at that time, they should consult their Rav. For the Project Chana Power Hour, we will learn the halachas of Veses She'ena Kavua, a cycle that is not fixed. According to halacha, a woman is to separate intimately from her husband and anticipate the start of her period according to these three methods of calculation every single month. The Veses HaChodesh, the monthly cycle, the Ona Beinanis, the average cycle, and the Veses HaFloga, the interval cycle. Thank you for joining us this evening. Please join us next week for part 2 of the Onas HaVeses, when I will go into the three methods of calculation in detail. And please be aware that you can access this and all past classes at mikvah.org/power hour. Thank you and good night.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Klein. For our next topic in Kashrus, tonight we will be exploring the topic of Chametz She'avar Olav HaPesach, Chametz that a Jew owned over Pesach, and how that might apply to our next shopping trip to the grocery store. We are grateful to have back with us Rabbi Zibel. Rabbi Zibel is the Kashrus administrator at the RCF, the Rabbinate of Central Florida, and delivers classes to the general public on various Kashrus topics. He is also highly active in answering consumers' Kashrus questions on a daily basis. Thank you very much for being part of our program tonight.
Thank you very much for having me, and a good evening. So as mentioned, we're going to be discussing post-Pesach purchases, specifically when in regards to Chametz She'avar Olav HaPesach, Chametz which Pesach passed and it was not properly sold and was owned by a Jew. This topic can have various practical applications, especially in areas where someone has less frum stores that are not selling their chametz properly, and there possibly could be Jewish store owners. And we'll be discussing what stores to look out for, what stores one could shop at without any questions, and as well, when there is questions, what things to avoid, until when to avoid it, how long to avoid it for, and so on and so forth. We will also be at a certain point looking at some points in a document. This document will be attached to the class when the class will be uploaded to be seen online. So, midaraisa, on a Torah level, if chametz was owned on Pesach by a yid, the yid obviously transgresses his avra on the Isser Bal Yirah Bal Yamatza every moment that it was in his possession. But after Pesach, on a Torah level, this chametz is mutter, is permissible, and there's nothing wrong with the chametz. This applies even if that's on the Torah level. Now the Chachamim, however, put a knas, put a penalty on a yid that held chametz in his possession over Pesach. That if he did so, the penalty is that after Pesach, the chametz is absolutely forbidden, and it's forbidden on a very strict level to the point that it's asur b'hana. It's forbidden even to have any benefit from it. So even if he wants to feed it to his dog or give it to his friend as a gift, it's absolutely forbidden. This applies also even if somebody did not own it per se, but it was in his possession. What does that mean? Because on a Torah level, if somebody was mevatel chametz, said that whatever chametz is my property is null and void, is batul, and is like the dust of the earth and ownerless and hefker, technically on a Torah level, one does not have any Isser, does not transgress an Isser, does not aver on any Isser, even though it's in his possession, if he was mevatel it and if he was made a hefker. However, the Chachamim still enforced their knas, their penalty, that if somebody had chametz in his property, even if he was mevatel it, even if he made it ownerless and hefker and nullified it, he still cannot benefit from that chametz after Pesach, and it's asur obviously in achila, eating it, and even ba'ana, even having any type of benefit from it. Since this is a knas, a penalty that's midrabanan, in general, when it comes to matters of the Rabbanan, there is a bit more leniencies. So in some areas, it may be a bit more lenient. Generally, there's a rule when it comes to matters of the Rabbanan that suffix the Rabbanan, the Kula, if you have a doubt when it comes to a matter of the Rabbanan, something that the Chachamim established or made forbidden, if there's a doubt, you could be lenient. So there's a discussion. Does this rule also apply here? And there are two opinions. Out there being two opinions. One opinion says that yes, this is just like any other D'Rabbanan. So if you have a doubt, you're not sure if this chametz is chametz that was owned or on Pesach or was in a Jew's possession on Pesach without, and basically it was in a Jew's possession over Pesach and he didn't get rid of it. Then, if there's a doubt, that's already enough that one could consume it and could have enough from it. It's only if you know for sure that it was in his possession that you're not allowed to have benefit from it. But if there's a doubt, then you could. However, the Alter Rebbe brings a second opinion that holds that no, in this case, a bit stricter. And even if there's a doubt, still one should not eat it. You could, however, have benefit from it when there's a doubt, but one should not eat it. Now, practically speaking, over the generations, many people would end up having chametz in their possession, and even if they're being bataled, even they're going to make it hefker or make it nullified like the dust of the earth, it would still be forbidden for them on a rabbinic level in the Rabbanan to use it after Pesach, and that's where the suggestion, the idea of selling your chametz to a guy having mechiras chametz came into the picture, especially for people that were going to have very big amounts of chametz that they would lose. If it was somebody that owns a mashka company or a beer or an inn where they were selling all that stuff. So that idea of selling it to a guy made it that over Pesach, it's not in your possession. And therefore, after Pesach, when you buy back, you could have enough from it and you could benefit from it. Otherwise, somebody would be stuck and have all this chametz in their possession. And even if they would give it away as a gift to a non-Jewish neighbor, who said they would even get it back? And therefore, this mechiras chametz came to help that chametz should not become usher by being in the Jew's possession over Pesach. And if a mechiras chametz is done, the Jew did not have it in his possession; it was in different possession, and that's enough to avoid the penalty of the Chachamim of the Rabbanan to make this chametz forbidden after Pesach. So in regards to selling chametz, so now if a Jew sold this chametz properly, then it would be totally fine to consume this chametz after Pesach. There would be no issues. The issues start when a Jew does not sell their chametz properly, or when there's a question about the sale, and that's what we'll be discussing partially in this class. Just to start off the bat, we're discussing, even when we know there's a problem, we're dealing only with foods here that are clearly chametz. So things from the 5 grains of Eretz Yisrael, which you have wheat, you have spelt, you have rye, and you have oats, and you have barley. From those 5 grains, something that became chametz would be forbidden. Anything else, if it's kitnius, that's fine. Even if it passed Pesach without being sold, one would be able to consume it, and would not be an issue. Although, and also chametz is only once these 5 grains got wet and sat for 18 minutes without being moved, then they become chametz. What's a practical list of some things? So a person may think flour never got wet, so maybe flour would not be considered chametz, and you can get it anywhere after Pesach. So when it comes to flour, actually, most flour, when it's processed, they temper the flour to make it easier for grinding with a little bit of water and enough water to make it that the flour is considered chametz. So flour is considered chametzdik, and that would be something that you have to be careful where you're buying it after Pesach to make sure that if it was owned by a Jew, it was properly sold. Other items that could be sometimes not noticeable, sometimes people get confused. They see something is gluten-free, they think that's fine, but actually gluten-free could many times include in it oats, which oats is 100% chametz. So a product that's gluten-free could be 100% chametz. So gluten-free does not mean much for such a thing. One would have to look into it to see if there's any oats present. At times, even innocent cereals like cornflakes or Rice Krispies could seem like there's no chametz in them, but many times they will contain some malt, and malt is produced from chametz. It's considered chametz would be an issue to buy such a product. When it comes to vinegars, in America at least, most vinegars are assumed to have been made from corn-based, kidneys-based, and therefore there's no concern in regards to that. However, outside America, especially in Europe, vinegars many times are made from wheat starch, and therefore things with vinegar in it or vinegar itself, including things with vinegar like mustard, ketchup, pickles, and olives, and all that, would be possibly chametz, and therefore one should only buy it from places that you're certain properly sold their chametz over Pesach. When it comes to oats, many times oats as well are steamed, and that steam, it gives it enough moisture that it becomes a problem of chametz. So even if someone's just getting plain oats or plain oatmeal, that would be an issue. One thing which is known to not be an issue is barley kernels. Barley kernels are not in any way treated with water or don't come in contact with water. So that could be one thing that someone could buy in a store and not have to be concerned regarding if the store properly sold its chametz or not on Pesach. Now, a practical example, something that can happen in someone's own home of chametz over Pesach, is if somebody has a Amazon subscribe and save, if it's granola bars, whatever it is, something that came on Pesach, and for whatever reason, either they were away, they didn't notice it, or whatever it is, they didn't get rid of it, they didn't burn it on Pesach, which that would be the case, they would have to get rid of it, or they came back home after Pesach and realized it was delivered. In such a case, that would be a personal case of chametz over Pesach. In such a case, it would not be allowed to give it away as a gift or to do anything with it except for throwing it out. In regards to stores, so there are different approaches out there in the world from Jews. Some want to take a very strict approach. This is generally not something that Lubavitchers follow, but this is just mentioning an approach out there. Some want to take a very strict approach and will only buy things that were fully processed after Pesach. I mean, let's say cookies or cake. They'll only buy things that the flour was bought after Pesach from a Geisha company and everything was made after Pesach. They don't want to rely on any point on Mechiras Chametz because they feel like Mechiras Chametz is a way of getting around getting around in the loophole, and they feel that why should I rely on that? It was used originally for people that were in a dire state that couldn't get rid of their chametz, and they therefore rather only buy things that are fully processed and baked and made after Pesach. So sometimes you'll see items that have a sticker on it made after Pesach. It's to cater to those crowds, and such people will even avoid going to any Jewish stores that sold their chametz. They specifically will go to non-Jewish stores that are totally questioned, that basically didn't have to rely on any type of Mechiras Chametz, was fully owned by Goyim, no issue at all. But again, that's a strict approach that's out there, but it's not something that's followed by Chabad. On the contrary, in Chabad, we have a very effective Mechiras Chametz. The Alter Rebbe has a very effective Mechiras Chametz, and we specifically sell chametz gomer when we're selling it, and we rely on it fully as well afterwards to buy things from stores that sold their chametz properly. And so those are some approaches out there. Again, they only buy things from a yid that was fully done after Pesach, or they'll go to buy from Goyim. But again, there's those that follow that if it was sold properly, the sale is a proper sale. We can't cast any doubt on the sale, and therefore it's totally fine to buy it. And that's what we're going to be addressing, ones that are following that approach, that you can have a proper sale and it's totally fine to go and buy things that were properly sold. What do we look out for? What do we need to know? So obviously, if you're living in Crown Heights or a place where there's a firm owner and there's local rabbanim that are making the mechir for the local firm owners, that's not something that you're looking out for. It's taken care of, and it's something that is done properly. But if somebody's living in a place, or even if you're living in a place like Crown Heights, but you want to shop in other stores, If it's Target, if it's Walmart, if it's Trader Joe's or the like, then you need to start knowing, are those stores owned by Yidden? And if they are owned by Yidden, or how much homework, how much research do I need to make to know that they're owned by that these are owned by Jews? Like we said earlier, that's when you have a suffix, when you have a doubt, generally it could be a bit more lenient by the Rabbanans. Even if you want to take a stricter approach here, the question is, what's considered a doubt? If I could pick up a phone and find out if the owner is Jewish or not, is that still a doubt, or is that already just lack of knowledge? So Halacha discusses this, and it says if it's efshel l'vurei b'kalos, if it's easy to look into it and find out, that's not considered a doubt even. That's just considered lack of information, and you need to just do your due diligence and find out the information. A doubt only exists when there's a real doubt, when it's too hard for you to just make a simple, some basic effort and find that information. You have to go through a lot more work, and even then you may not get a clear answer, so that's already considered a doubt. But otherwise, it's not even considered a doubt, so there's nothing to talk about. There's no leniencies even to apply here. If it's something that's more easy to find out, there's no doubts even, and there's not even an approach to start being lenient. So these days, especially with a lot of information being public, accessible on the internet, there's a lot more information that one could find out and know about stores and who owns it and which families own certain branches and certain stores and all that. And therefore, it's not so simple to call it a doubt that we're not sure, but actually it's just a lack of information, and it could be pretty easy to find out a lot of this information. So therefore, it's something that doesn't mean every person has to start doing their homework, but something that Rabbanim should be looking out for the communities. And as mentioned, we're going to mention a list that ACO put together. The Association of Kashrus Organizations put together a list. They've done thorough research for months to make it accessible for a bundle of communities and for people to easily know which places are owned by Yidden and so on and so forth. Obviously, when it comes to these matters, relying on AI or ChatGPT and all that could be very inaccurate, and one should not in any way go in that direction. So we're going to discuss some practical issues. So one practical issue is you have a store, and there's Jewish owners, but the owners are not frum, and therefore, worst case, they're not selling their chametz at all. They didn't sell their chametz at all. That obviously would be an issue. All chametz that they acquired that came into their possession over Pesach becomes asur ba'ana, and therefore they would be totally, you wouldn't be able to shop there. Question is, how long does that last? How long does things last on the shelf? So it depends on many factors. It depends on the store, if it's a mom and pop shop store, or if it's a busy commercial store that many people go to. Depends on the items. Some items go quicker. Some items take a little longer. It's dry goods at times. Some things may go quicker. Sometimes frozen things. So there are many factors, and it's very hard to give exact numbers. Some items it could take on a busier store. Some items already 2-3 weeks after Pesach, they're already it's a totally new stock that came after Pesach and wasn't owned by that Jewish person on Pesach. Sometimes it could be a month till about Lag BaOmer time for some things. Some things like alcohol or certain frozen foods or some things that are less popular may take all the way until Shavuos time, 7-8 weeks or more, depending from Pesach, depending on what it is and also how fast the store is. So that's really one should speak to a local Rav to determine what makes sense and based on the store and all that. At times there are they're Jewish-owned stores, but they make a mechira, they sell their chametz, but they continue selling the chametz over Pesach. Some have issue with that because the fact that they're continuing to sell the chametz shows that they're never really maybe meant the fact that they sold the chametz, they were not really interested in the sale. Others say that no, it's a proper sale. Just every time they sell it, they're stealing from the guy. That's where Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva saying that it's 100% perfectly fine sale, and just every time the Jew sells something, he's stealing from the guy, and instead he's doing an area of stealing, but when it comes to chametz, he didn't do anything wrong. But even then, such a sale, if they just sold the chametz that was around when the sale happened, only that chametz is sold. If on day one of Pesach, this Jewish company goes and buys a whole truckload of food, that cannot be included in the sale because a sale cannot include future purchases that are not yet physically owned by the person. So halachically that wouldn't work. So if someone did sell the chametz of a Jewish store like that, it still wouldn't work for things that were bought on Pesach. And how do you start knowing what was bought on Pesach, wasn't bought on Pesach? So yeah, it goes back to a suffix, and we again mentioned that the Alter Rebbe should avoid even in such a case. So that's sale already in general shaky, and could be even more shaky when they're buying things on Pesach, which is very common. And at times there's a sale that the way it works, they sell the whole business to a non-Jew for Pesach. So therefore, even if things are bought on Pesach, they were owned by a non-Jew. The whole business is owned by a non-Jew, not just the chametz. And that's how some people take care of some Rabbanim take care of such a problem. So even if things are bought on Pesach, more chametz bought on Pesach, it's owned by the guy, it's fine. Then you have obviously the Geisha ownership. And if there's such a Geisha ownership, you would think technically there's no issue, but there's one issue that could be, is distributors. Where do stores get all their food from? They have a distributor that comes and provides them with the food. Those distributors at times could be Jewish. There are some big Jewish distributors in America, and they provide some stores like Target in some places gets from a Jewish distributor, although Target is not owned by Jews, but they're getting from a distributor. This distributor, if he didn't sell his chametz, comes day one of Pesach, he owns chametz, he's now giving it to Target. It doesn't change the halacha, the fact that a guy now owns it. Since it wasn't a Jew's hand, it became forbidden hana. That for Isser hana stays on forever, and that's something else to look into. So if someone has information that it could be a Jewish distributor, one also needs to clear that. And that's the document that we mentioned is going to be attached to this class. We'll get more into detail. And obviously, things also change from year to year. Ownership changes, stores change their distributors, and a lot changes. So there is a lot to be informed of and to look out for after Pesach, and as well when it comes to stores like Walmart or Amazon that they sell online. Many times they're selling from many different vendors, and at times those vendors could also be Jewish and didn't sell the chametz. So those are things as well to look out to. We are actually running short on time, but the document mentioned, this ACO document of post-Pesach purchases, will have more details on all that was discussed, and will give clarity on anything else which may have not been discussed in this class. Thank you very much for having me. Good evening.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Zibel. Okay, let's put a coin in the pushka, and then we're going to say the Rebbe's kapitel together, as well as kapitel Chaf for Eretz Yisrael. Shir hamalas habaytchem badainai, kahartziain la yimait la'elam yeshev. Yerushalayim harim saviv la, vadainait saviv la'amai, me'ata va'ad eilam. Ki la yanuach shevet haresha al garel hatzadikim, leman la yishlecho hatzadikim ba'avlasa yedehem. Heitiva Adonai la'toivim v'lisharim bilibasam. V'hamatim ha'kalkalaisam yalichem Adonai es payalei ha'aven, shalom al Yisrael. Now we'll say together Kapitel Chaf for continued safety in Eretz Yisrael and all over the world. Lamnatseach mizmor LaDavid, Yancha Adonai b'yom tzara, Yisagev Hashem Elehei Yaakov. Yishlach ezocha mikaidesh u'mitzion yisadeka. Yizkar kol min chaysecha v'ailascha yadash nesela. Yiten lacha chelvavecha v'chal atzascha yimale. Niranano b'shuaisecha v'shem Elehei nanidgal, yimale Adonai kol mishalesecha. Ata yadati ki haishi Adonai Mashiachai, Yanehu mishmei kadshai bigvorais yeshai yaminai. Ele varecha ve'ele vasusim, v'anachno b'shem Adonai Eloheinu nazkir. Hei makara v'nafalo v'anachno kamno v'nisaidad, Adonai haishia hamelech Yaneinu v'yom kareinu. The Mashiach thought from today, Macharei Mos Kedoshim Tafshin and Aleph, There was no concealment of the Shekhinah in the Kodesh HaKodashim, and yet the Kohen Gadol confronted this revelation as a human being within a physical body. Similarly, in the era of Geula, Elokus will be manifest throughout the world, and yet the natural order will not change, and we will appreciate this revelation in a state similar to our present one. Quick reminder, please continue partnering with us to keep our classes going. We rely on and appreciate all contributions. You can log on to mikvah.org/donate and just make sure to select Project Chana Power Hour in the options so that it goes towards our program. Thank you. If you appreciate these classes, please share them with your friends and family. All playbacks are available on mikvah.org/power hour and also on all podcast platforms as well as 24/6. Search us up as Project Chana Power Hour. If you have questions on the classes or would like to dedicate a week of learning in honor or le'ilei nishma someone, please reach out to us on our email, projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com. May our learning prepare us in our homes and bring every Jew home to Eretz Yisrael with Mashiach now. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. As a reminder, you can sponsor a class by reaching out to projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com. Please rate and like this episode to help others find the podcast. Tune in next week for another class. Have a wonderful day.